Now, let me just start by saying this will not be one of those videos where I stand around the garage and sit in the car and talk the whole time. Mind you, all of the talking you're going to hear will be just me standing around or sitting in the car in the garage. But there's a whole bunch of driving clips, and then I'll overlay a whole bunch of pictures from the laptop of the ECU software when I'm talking about the tuning and whatnot. So stay tuned. So when I last left off, we just got her fired up. That was a huge milestone. This was my first engine build, and since then it's been a whirlwind of I don't want to say headaches, but just small annoying roadblocks. I had a coolant hose blow off, which I had my flat floor on, and that caused all the coolant to go out to the sides. And it's a good thing it happened in the garage, because if it happened on the road, the coolant would have literally been directed underneath the tires. So the flat floor needs to get modified so that the water, if I do have a leak, it doesn't channel at the tires, and there's areas for it to drip. What else? I got an oil leak. I'm fairly confident it's my rear main seal, and that's going to require taking the back half of the car off. I know, right? Awesome. So outside of those few mechanical problems, fairly minor in the grand scheme of rebuilding an engine and yet another transmission swap, I've been out driving the car, but I had a really annoying tuning problem. So on a Rotary, typically you have 2 primary and 2 or 4 secondary injectors, and the primary are usually a smaller injector. They're much closer to the combustion chamber. The secondary are further back on the lower intake manifold, and they come in later. A lot of this is based around the factory throttle body and upper intake manifold setup, where there's a second set of butterflies, so that the primary ports, where the primary injectors are located right at the bottom of them, that's what the car runs on idle and cruise and low RPM. Now, because I'm running a drive-by-wire throttle body, just one big plenum, or one big throttle body, it goes into an open plenum. There's no longer butterflies. So at all times, when the car is running, it's sucking air, or air is getting blown in through both primary and secondary ports. So initially, I was having some issues because I had it running on just primaries, and then as the secondaries would come in, it would mess up with my VE table when I'm tuning in. It was getting wavy, and it was unpredictable, and it wasn't that smooth kind of mound that's an even transition that it should be. So on just about all modern ECUs or standalone ECUs, they're VE based, so it's volumetric efficiency. You treat the engine as an air pump. You basically define where it's most efficient and at what RPM, what load, what its percentage of efficiency is based on its size. And then based off of that, the ECU will calculate how much fuel to put in. Once upon a time, you would tell it, pulse width and how much fuel to inject. Now we just figure out where it flows the most air, and it will go from there. So it should be a fairly smooth, peaking at, depending on the porting, 5 to 7,000 RPM, and then slowly tapering off, very smooth. What was happening is it was super inconsistent, and a lot of that had to do with the staging and the secondary injectors coming in, and it just wasn't working well. Accidentally, when I was doing a log for a friend of mine, shout out to Scotty, thanks for all your help, I had it running 50% secondaries, 50% primaries from idle, and then a little bit of that drive, and then I switched it over to show the difference. And he pointed out, well, why not just run your secondaries all the time? And there's no answer to not in this scenario, because my secondary ports are always open. They're always gulping air at idle, and when you get in the boost, they're flowing because they're never blocked off. So why would I not inject fuel through those? It's no different than, in this sense, a 4-cylinder. There's 4 ports going into the engine, all 4 ports, there's air flowing, so let's put fuel in all of those. And that kind of solved all my problems. And a lot of the summer, I worked a lot, but a lot of the summer I was struggling with that and getting real stumped and just trying new things and messing it up, thinking I have it solved, go away for work, come back, try a few more things. Didn't work. And this was kind of the big game changer. And I've been away on work for what seems like forever, probably 6 weeks between the time I figured that out at like the last minute before I went to work to being able to actually try it. And that was just a few days ago. And leaps and bounds in the past few days. I went from barely getting into any boost and just trying to shape the VE map very delicately to doing wide open pulls at 8 psi, and then eventually seeing 11 psi before I had to call it quits. So once I was no longer trying to mess with the staging of the injectors, and I just had them both on all the time, then I could just focus on cleaning up the VE map, and it cleaned up so much faster. Like I had spent hours and hours doing like a few logs and then changing a few logs and changing trying to get that VE table to all of a sudden things clicked and the table was taking shape. That's the one thing that you don't realize when you're going to tune a car yourself. Like I've watched so many videos from High Performance Academy, can't recommend them enough. I understand all the concepts, but when the practical doesn't work as simple and easy as Andre makes it seem in those videos, that's when experience comes into play. And sometimes you have to just bow out and say, I need help, right? Fortunately, I had Scotty give me a hand. And then finally, once I figured out about that, not staging the injectors, just running them both all the time, everything worked as it should. I did a log. I had a little bit of, because I'm doing it on the street, I had a little bit of feedback left in there. So it was reading the O2 sensor and compensating. Everything was on the rich side, so I was just slowly taking fuel out, slowly basically lowering the VE numbers until it was repeatable. And that's what was happening is now it would tell me it's at 95% because there's the VE that I'm saying, and then it'll tell you a new VE with the AEM, and that's the number that should be there. So you change it to that number, then you go back, you hit that cell again when you're driving, and all of a sudden your air-fuel ratio is almost bang on target. So it was just easy, just kind of go through. Initially it's holding the brake and trying to hold an RPM. Now that's easy on the dyno, a little trickier on the road. You basically use the brake to keep the car at the same speed, the same RPM, and then slowly open the throttle, and that'll increase either your throttle percentage if you're doing alpha N tuning, or I was just doing map for the load for the y-axis to engine RPM. So you just climb up through the cells in say the 2000 mark, and it would just go up in your boost, right? Go from vacuum to atmospheric to positive pressure, and then do that at 2500, 3000, 3500, 4000. It gets kind of hard to hold the car back with the brakes, and you're cooking the brakes a little bit. And anything above that, good luck. It's maybe on a lower horsepower car, maybe naturally aspirated, you could successfully try to hold it at a certain RPM, but not this beast. No chance whatsoever, just cooking the brakes. So that was kind of my limit, was that 3,500, 4,000 that I could try to do cell by cell. And then I had to do a little more trying to hit cells, different throttles, different different throttle percentages, different gears, just trying to hit as many cells as possible. Every time I hit it, tweak it a little bit, and then the map kind of just starts smoothing out and taking shape. Now on the dyno, you could probably go to 5, maybe even 6,000 RPM, just doing that cell by cell. But then you're probably going to start overheating at that high, so that's kind of your limit. Once you get to the higher RPM, you kind of got to just do ramp runs, or just try to cruise in as high as you can in the RPM and range or change your throttle position or your load. There were certain milestones I wanted to figure out before winter, because I needed to mechanically sort the car out, figure out, okay, she drives good, there's no knocking, she doesn't pull, like the alignment was, all the little things, because I had made changes. I had put in the new rear hubs and made some adjustments back there. I had played with suspension, corner balancing it over the winter. Certain things are rubbing the fender on the front and on both sides is rubbing a little bit. Finding that oil leak that now I can fix in the rear main seal. Got a little bit of a coolant leak. I think it's just my rad cap. Address that. Just all those little tweaks that I just need to iron out now so she's ready to go in the spring. And then as far as the engine, I actually see some RPM. I mean, the most I've ever seen in this car before this week was 5,000 RPM. 5,000 RPM is what I blew the first motor up at. I don't want to say I blew it up. It failed. And it failed long before it hit that 5,000 RPM. That was just the time that it tapped out. But I'd never been more than that, so I needed to get to higher RPM just to, make sure everything's good. I built this engine. I wanted to see, it get to a higher RPM. I needed to get into positive boost. I needed to find out if I have any issues with boost creep, which is a real concern on some of the forums with the EFR turbos, with the internal wastegate, that they have trouble maintaining a low boost. I don't, but I didn't know that was going to be the case. So I was able to hold 7-8 psi, and then I had to increase preload on the wastegate in order to go up from there. But that's a really positive sign. That means that, I can run it at 7 or 8 psi, no problem. Which some guys, they struggle to keep it to 14, 15 psi, and that's a risk for me I didn't want to take. Being Bridgeported, some people on the forums told me it was definitely going to creep. So I ported my turbo exhaust housing, the turbine housing, quite heavily. And then my exhaust manifold is quite straight, a nice even shot. There's no turbulence there like there is in pretty much any EFR turbo manifold where the engine's in the front of the car. There's just not enough room there. It's going to be cramped. Mine, straight shot out, just ideal. I also have a slightly restrictive exhaust with the cat in there, and that gives me a good indication that boost control is possible. Now I am going to change the exhaust. It is too goddamn loud. Like, it is just a heat bag. If it was just a race car, I would leave it. It sounds great, as you'll hear in these clips, but it's just way too loud for the streets. And I'm in Edmonton, and police here like to really crack down on loud vehicles. And I pretty much, if cops sees me, I'm going to get a ticket. It's that loud. It's like idling. It doesn't sound any different than Harley, and it just gets louder from there. So I definitely need to address the exhaust. And now I have a benchmark. With this exhaust, I got no boost creep. So now if I go to a more free-flowing but more muffled exhaust and I get boost creep, well, then I know just a little extra restriction in there will prevent that. But to be honest, the fact that I was able to hold 7-8 psi, I just don't think that there's a recipe there for the boost creep. Even if I'm only able to hold as down low as 10 or 12, that's fine. That's kind of my target for street driving, pump gas. So I'd be happy with that. Initially I was doing partial throttle pulls, and it was doing 7-8 psi, about 157 kPa, and that's kind of where it was peaking out. And then I started getting into full throttle pulls, and then it still wasn't making any more boost, but then I was able to tune it at that. I got 150 kPa mark on my VE graph, so I was able to tune that fairly accurately, because that's kind of where it was topping out. Then I went back to the wastegate, put another turn in it. Didn't seem to get any change. Tried it again, put 2 more turns into it, and then at partial throttle, I peaked at about 83. At peak power, it was like 75, and it was at 11 psi. So I didn't do any full throttle or wide open throttle pulls at 11 psi. I've got to toy with that a little bit more in partial throttle and start pulling out fuel, but just ran out of time in the year. But like, it's a beast. It is, and to be honest, it's simply at this point, second gear pulls happen too quick to get a decent log. The third gear is just sketchy for the street. So I think I'm pretty much limited to the track or the dyno to tune it any further. But there's a whole lot more to do on the street, cleaning up just the little things, off throttle, transient. There's so many little tweaks to do that I haven't really gotten to yet, and I look forward to all that fine tuning. It'll be a constant, logging all the time, and setting up the laptop or pulling out the laptop every time I'm driving it. Just a few little tweaks. So many people tell me a Bridgeport is just going to be so hard to drive. You're going to have to be, high RPM. So driving residential, I'd have to be in first gear at 3,000-4,000 RPM, where it would just be bucking and all over the place. It's not. I can go second gear, 2,000 RPM, and just cruise through residential. It's still ridiculously loud at 2,000 RPM, so I have to adjust that with the exhaust. But its road manners are just unreal, just so smooth. Now, obviously, it is still an aggressive engine. So if I hit a big bump and I'm holding it at 2,000 RPM, she's gonna go wah, wah, wah. It's gonna start to jerk, and that's just the nature of it. But the fact that I can cruise at low RPM, and it's super stable, is wonderful. It idles about 1250 RPM, which is pretty low for a Rotary, or for a Bridgeport, I should say. A lot of guys are 1800 RPM. It will idle at like 1,000, but you kind of got to find that happy point, and that seems to be 12 to 1300 once it's warm. So I guess that's kind of it. The car is running, it's driving, it is a riot, it is scary fast, and not even remotely close to being tuned yet.